It is that time of year. We do this every season where we look at all 16 playoff drivers and one by one we make a championship case for them. Now please listen closely. This is not a prediction, okay? I'm doing this for all 16 drivers. Right now 12 drivers are locked in as of today, the making of this video. And once those last 4 spots are locked in, we'll talk about them too. Now, as for those guys that are locked in, I made a schedule that we are going to do during this Olympic break. Go to the community post to check that out. But how this works is we have our driver today. It is Kyle Larson, the 2021 NASCAR Cup Series champion. And essentially what we're going to do is we're going to look at these racetracks in the playoffs. We're going to look at his numbers. We're going to look at his season so far as well, give you some numbers in that. And then I am going to tell you what I think is the most realistic possible way for Kyle Larson to win the championship. Now, these first few cases usually are pretty easy because Kyle Larson's a really good driver. But this year, I will say, it's a little bit more complicated, even for the top drivers like Larson, due to the way the schedule works out. But once we get further down the line, it becomes just overall more complicated because it's more unrealistic. But today, as I said, we are starting with 2021 NASCAR Cup Series champion Kyle Larson. Has 4 wins on the 2024 season. Las Vegas was the first one. Then he won at Kansas. Then he won Sonoma. And then he won one of the crown jewels, the Brickyard 400. He leads the league in wins this year, has 9 top 5s, 11 top 10s, 8 stage wins, which is second in the league. 28 playoff points as of right now, and of course he leads the points, and if he can hold on to that points lead, he gets 15 bonus points. He's led the second most laps in NASCAR this season with 763, and the first point, I'm going to make this for everyone, there's no such thing as too many playoff points. I say this every year, and I always reference one person, and if you're a part of this fan base, I'm sorry, but it has to be brought up. Ask Kevin Harvick in 2020 if there is such thing as too many playoff points. No, there is not. Kyle Larson, you, in this situation, I think you and Christopher Bell, we'll talk about Bell here in a few days, you are the 2 guys who need the playoff points the most for these first couple of rounds. Okay, so goal number 1 for Kyle Larson. You've got a few races left in the regular season. Lock up that regular season championship. Maybe get a win or 2. I think Richmond, Michigan, Darlington, those are great opportunities for you to get a win. And if you can't win, get a stage win. But lock up that regular season championship. Get 15 points to your name. Get a stage win or 2, 3, 4, however many you can get, and a race win or 2. Get as many points as you can. Now, ultimately, right now, Kyle Larson sits atop the points in terms of the playoff points, but it's not like we see every year. Usually the regular season champion has a little bit of a gap to even second in the points, especially on the cutoff line, but this year it's not so much. Larson has 28 points right now. The bottom of the grid has probably 1 or 2 if we're being realistic, so he's got a good gap. And ultimately, Larson will get some bonus points. I think the worst he finishes in the standings is 4th. I think mathematically it could be 6th or 7th, but let's say 4th is the absolute worst. So that's 7 points, I believe, at the very least. So he's getting at least 35 points heading into this thing. And I think he should, let's look at the playoff schedule. Firstly, the playoff schedule. It is absurd this year. We have 2 super speedways, 2 road courses, 2 short tracks, 2 mile-and-a-halfs, and Phoenix, which is kind of a hybrid thingy. But this first round, oh my goodness, this is something. We go Atlanta, Watkins Glen, Bristol. If it wasn't for Watkins Glen and Bristol and the amount of points Larson had, I'd be concerned about this round. Kyle Larson, since the new Atlanta, you got to remember, Atlanta used to be a basic mile-and-a-half track. If it was, I'd say Kyle Larson's the favorite to win that race. But since it's now a super speedway, we got to do a complete 180. Kyle Larson, in the 5 races since Atlanta has been turned into a super speedway, has 1 finish of 30th or better. He crashes out a lot on these super speedways, whether it's his fault or not. He does not get the results at super speedways, and that is my biggest concern coming into the playoffs for Larson, and it's really the only concern I have. You can point out sometimes he's not really in over his head, but sometimes he's sloppy, or the better word would be over-ambitious. And, you know, you look at Homestead last year, Texas last year, wrecking while contending for the win, even Iowa this year. But in those particular situations, Homestead, he was already locked in the Final Four. Texas was a little bit of an over-analyzed risk, and Iowa was in the regular season, so who cares at the end of the day? But sometimes, yes, Larson does go in over his head and crash himself while contending for a win, but at the super speedways, it doesn't matter if it's him, it doesn't matter if it's someone else. He finds the wall at these tracks, and that is my biggest concern for Kyle Larson in the playoffs. But the good news is that one, he has the points as of right now, and I anticipate him getting more before the end of the regular season. And number two, these next two tracks are quite good for him. Kyle Larson has 2 wins at Watkins Glen. In every race with Hendrick Motorsports at Bristol, he has gotten a top 5, including a win in 2021. So despite Atlanta being a little scary, and that could put him not necessarily on the back foot, but pretty close to that playoff cutoff line, I think at the end of the day, he makes it through this first round without ease, and I think he could very easily win Watkins Glen or Bristol. Now we go to the second round. This is the round I'm straight up concerned about for Kyle Larson. Kansas, Talladega, and the Roval. Kansas, he's going to be one of the favorites to win. He won this race in the spring. He has 2 wins to his name at this racetrack. Kyle Larson at Kansas, Kyle Larson at the 1.5 miles is just a force to be reckoned with. In this next-gen era, whether it's Vegas, whether it's Homestead, Texas, Kansas, you name it, he will lead the most laps in the race. He'll sweep the stages, and sometimes he even goes on to win the race, depending on how the race goes. Kyle Larson at the intermediate tracks, at worst, is top 5 as long as there's not a problem. As long as, a wheel doesn't go flying off like at Texas. As long as they don't get a pit road penalty. As long as they don't get involved in an incident. As long as Larson doesn't crash himself, they will indeed run top 5 in this race. So I'm not concerned about Kansas at all. It's these next two. Talladega, as I said, Kyle Larson, oh my God, at these super speedway racetracks is not pretty. It's not pretty at all. Now, thankfully, Kyle Larson, unlike Atlanta, he has some decent results here, but it's a wide variety of results. He has a 4th place finish back in the spring race of 2022, but we have a couple of finishes in the 30s, and we do have an 18th, a 15th, and 21st. Respectfully, though, I think that gets you through, because if you're finishing 18th, if you're even finishing 21st, let's say you get a couple stage points on the day, and realistically, other playoff guys are going to crash at Talladega, whether it's someone that's up there in the points with you like Denny Hamlin, or it's someone at the bottom of the field like a Daniel Suarez, an Austin Cindric, or Bubba Wallace. If someone like that, someone in the playoffs is going to crash, and ultimately that would even itself out. But the Roval is a tiny bit concerning for me. I know he has that win back in 2021, but the numbers outside of that aren't too pretty. Finishes of 13th, 35th, 13th, and 25th. And that's where my concern is this round. I think Larson, once again, is going to have probably the most points heading into this round. And as I said, if he wins at Kansas, then we don't even have to worry about these 2 tracks. But let's say he finishes 4th at Kansas, gets 15 stage points on the day, has a really good buffer to the cutoff zone. But then the next week at Talladega, he crashes, and suddenly he doesn't really have much of a buffer. It's 10, 15 points. And then all of a sudden we're heading into a Roval, which statistically has not been a great racetrack for him, a great road course for him. All of a sudden, we've got the guy who's leading the points, has the most playoff points, on the verge of getting eliminated. And that's why this round is my concern. Now, once again, if you can win at Kansas, I think that's ultimately the easiest path. That's easy to say. But ultimately, I think a top 5 at Kansas, a top 20 at Talladega, and a top 15 at the Roval gets you through to the next round. And if Kyle Larson gets through to the next round, yeah, he's making the championship four. Barring wrecks in all 3 races, I genuinely don't see how Kyle Larson misses the championship four. This could age horribly wrong. This could be an aged NASCAR tweet. But Kyle Larson, at these next 3 tracks, has wins at all of them. He's won the last 2 races at Las Vegas. He has 3 in his career. He won at Homestead Miami Speedway 2 years ago, and, well, he didn't finish well last year. He was competing for the win when he drove into the tire barriers, or the sand barriers. And at Martinsville, he finished 2nd in the spring and won in the spring of 2023. So, yeah, this is a really good round for Kyle Larson. He's won a lot at Vegas. He's won a lot at Homestead. He's won a lot at Martinsville. as I said, I'd be shocked if he doesn't win one of these 3 races. And even if he doesn't, he'll realistically finish top 5 if all these races go normal, which sometimes they might not, and he might finish 12th or 13th. But he has a lot of bonus points. He's going to be competing for the win. He's going to score stage points in all 3 of these races. And ultimately, I can't believe it, but the most concerning round for every team, other than the championship, of course, is probably the least stressful for Kyle Larson because he has so much success on these racetracks. And once you get to Phoenix, it's a Hail Mary, you know. It's anything can happen. The top 3 can wreck, blah, blah, blah. This format is silly. But I will say Kyle Larson's numbers at Phoenix, they're not as all over the place as his super speedway numbers, but he did well at the beginning of the next gen era. He had a couple top 5s, led over 200 laps in a race, but I am a little bit concerned about this spring's result. He finished 14th after starting 17th, and really they ran there all day long. So I will say Phoenix itself is a little bit of a concern for me if I'm a Kyle Larson fan, if I'm a part of Kyle Larson's team, whatever it may be. But at the end of the year, you bring your best equipment, you bring your best car, and ultimately they'll be top 10 at the worst if it comes down. All their resources, all their attention is going to be on Phoenix once they make that Final Four. And realistically, he could go out and win Las Vegas, and they have extra weeks to prepare that Phoenix car. So Kyle Larson, here is ultimately, I think, what his path will be to the championship. That first round, he should be fine. Despite his poor numbers at Atlanta, even if he crashes there, Watkins Glen and Bristol are fantastic racetracks for him. Then we go to that second round, and that is the concerning round. Kansas, he could go out and win, and we don't have any worries about it. But even if he gets a really good result, if he finishes 3rd, sweeps the stages, that's a lot of points, but a crash at Talladega early, finishing in the 30s, and then a poor result at the Roval could put him close enough to the elimination line that, okay, he could end up on the bad side of this thing like 2022. And then we look at this round of 8, and that is ultimately the easiest round for Larson, I believe, because as I said, he's going to be top 5 at all these racetracks. He's won at all of them. He's won the last 2 at Vegas. Homestead, he's going to be a contender as long as he doesn't wreck himself out of contention or the race doesn't get wacky. He will ultimately win one of those 3 races. And as for Phoenix, who knows what could happen in this format. And then also just the fact of the matter is Hendrick Motorsports, Kyle Larson will show up with their best equipment, with their best performance, and they are ultimately going to have a shot no matter what has happened the rest of the playoffs. Championship case number 1, check. We have 15 to go. Tomorrow is Kyle Larson's teammate, Chase Elliott. We will talk about Elliott's path to the Final Four, ultimately to the championship. Can Elliott get his 2nd championship? Will it be his teammate Larson? Will it be Elliott? Will it be Daniel Suarez? Well, we'll talk about all 16 playoff drivers, their path to the championship, and how they can win it. So let me know your thoughts on Kyle Larson and his championship chances in 2024, what you think of this schedule for him, how you think he's going to do. Throw some predictions in there as well. I always love making these videos. I'll have a playlist made so you can go watch all 16. If you're watching this at the beginning of September and you want to know what's Austin Cindric's championship case, we'll get to it. You can go back and watch it. But thanks for watching. As I said, we'll do these for all of them.